We've officially hit it. The 5 o'clock whistle has blown. I hope that means a lot of you are headed home. And if you're stuck in traffic, thanks for choosing us here. My name is Chris Stigall, in for Vince today. Vince is out again tomorrow. He'll be back on Monday, as I understand it. But I'm happy to be here with you today. You know our number. It's the same, and I encourage you to use it if you want to weigh in on anything we're talking about today. 888-630-9625. 888-630-9625. I host a show down the street in Philadelphia in the mornings, and I always love to hang out with you. If you get some extra time and you want to check out maybe either the show or the podcast or follow along on Twitter, Facebook, any of that stuff, you can go to chrisstigall.com. CHRISSTIGALL. Well, we had some interesting news in the New York Post in the last 24, 48 hours. Headline, House GOP demands unredacted records of Biden using pseudonym while vice president. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer asking the National Archives yesterday to hand over any unredacted records in which President Biden used a pseudonym during his vice presidency as Republicans move closer to launching an impeachment inquiry. Comer's request covers records using Biden's known pseudonyms Robin Ware, W-A-R-E, and J.R.B. Ware. Joe Biden also allegedly used email addresses like robert.l.peters@pci.gov as an email address. Hunter was CC'd on those emails at least 10 times. Comer said Joe Biden has stated there was an absolute wall between his family's foreign business schemes and his duties as vice president, but evidence reveals that access was wide open for his family's influence peddling. Meanwhile, over in the House Judiciary, they have focused on the weaponization of government, on the private sector, particularly social media, and those who would try to tell this story of Hunter Biden. And Congressman, we're so glad that Congressman Ben Cline could be with us of Virginia's 6th Congressional District. He's on the House Judiciary Committee and joins us today to unpack this and the one-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Congressman, I'm sure you're popping champagne this afternoon. Welcome in.
Chris, good to be with you. That was definitely the most misnamed law that I've ever heard in my history on the Hill, but the administration doesn't hesitate to mislead the American people time and time again.
I just saw a story today, Congressman. I'll start with this. Mortgage rates could hit 8%, economists say, with mortgage rates firmly above 7%. 3 experts telling MarketWatch that if the economy continues to show signs of strength, the Fed hikes its benchmark interest rate once again, rates could go up to as high as 8%. I don't know the last time we've even seen something like that, Congressman.
The economy is a mixed bag, but when you're trying to afford a house and you're looking at mortgage rates, it's clear the American family is being squeezed. You go to the grocery store, you go to the gas pump, prices are up, and the American people are angry about it, and they want to see some action from Washington instead of excuses. Instead, what we see are, as you said, champagne corks popping by Democrats patting themselves on the back.
Your time since you've been on the House Judiciary, has it been, would you say it's been fruitful? Since the House convened under the Speaker's leadership, and you guys have been digging into the relationships between Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, as well as the weaponization of government. Have these proven fruitful in your view?
They have. We've been learning a lot, but it's come with a lot of challenges and difficulty. The chairman, Jim Jordan, is doing a fantastic job as chair of the Weaponization Committee, working with Jim Comer to make sure we get to the bottom of the collusion that's going on, not just between big tech and the administration and the news media, big media, but also the collusion that's going on between Hunter Biden and these foreign investors who are pay to play to get access to Joe Biden, whether it's in the vice president's mansion or now. And these information's coming out, and the American people are finding out just how deep it went. And the pseudonym is just the latest in a long line of efforts to avoid disclosure of the facts to the American people.
You and I have never spoken before, so I was looking you up and reading a little about you. You're relatively new to Congress, all things considered, 2019, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and so you having sort of still a fresh set of eyes and landing smack in the middle of the 2020 election and then the subsequent fallout. How do you read that? Just your 30,000-foot view. If you could talk about that generally and the reigning indictments on the former president at this hour, how do you, as a relative newcomer to the House, see all this?
Well, I arrived in Congress in 2019, was subjected right away to multiple impeachments of Donald Trump. And, Donald Trump syndrome, derangement syndrome among the Democrats is alive and well. They can't stand him. Their sole goal, whether it's Jamie Raskin or any of my other Democrat colleagues who are focused on Donald Trump, are trying to not just prevent him from winning in 2020, but prevent him from winning in 2024. So they're pulling out all the stops. And whether it's the federal, the state, or the local level, they know that he is not one of them. He's not part of the establishment. He speaks for the American people, and he is going to continue to speak for the American people. And, that's just frustrating to a lot of my Democrat colleagues.
Have you, and again, I'm just asking because we've never met before, and any answer is fine. I'm not looking for one. Have you specifically taken a position on the Republican primary? Are you endorsing or are you waiting?
I'm still watching the primary develop, but the president is far and away the leader in the primary battle right now, and there's not even a close second.
Yeah, and so as I ask that only because I think there are a number of people who just feel that the full weight of the federal government and then, these interlopers like this DA in Georgia and Manhattan, all of it combined is such a huge torrent of legal trouble for him that it would be almost impossible for him to win. And so when somebody says to you, it's impossible for a guy like Trump to win, I'm just curious how you would answer that.
Somebody who's very concerned, usually those kind of statements come from the Democrat side, and they're coming out of fear. They're statements being given out of fear that Donald Trump is going to win the nomination and win the election. And so they're pulling out all the stops. And when it comes to the point where you have local prosecutors, and there are thousands of prosecutors in jurisdictions all across the country who have state laws on the books that they enforce, but you look at the timing, you look at the issues that are being raised, the fact that this prosecutor in Georgia is charging federal officials in a business, which Mark Meadows is asking to be raised to a federal lawsuit. These are legitimate questions, and so it's going to be a continued fight as we proceed into the 2024 election. And the question is going to be how much are Democrats going to try and interfere in the 2024 election?
Congressman Ben Cline with us of Virginia's 6th Congressional District. Congressman, do you have any sense, is there any real talk about Joe Biden not being the nominee? Is that sincere? And I'm talking about amongst your colleagues and people that are legitimately kind of plugged in or whisper in back channel hallways with people that might really be in the know. Is that a legitimate possibility to most of you on Capitol Hill that Biden may not actually be the nominee?
Well, it's not just questions being raised by people in Washington. It's questions being raised by people on the street, my constituents who have family members who suffer from Alzheimer's, who have family members who suffer from dementia, who watch the president and his cadence, his rhetoric, the way he walks, the way he talks, and sees familiarity there. And so it's all across the country these questions are being asked, and it's entirely within the realm of possibility that we see somebody other than Joe Biden at the top of the ticket next year.
I spoke with Victor Davis Hanson about this, who's light years smarter than I'll ever be. I trust him implicitly, and I think he's a sober judge of character and the situation writ large. So my sense of it is Barack Obama is really the guy whose hand is on the tiller here. I asked him that. He said, it's without question in his mind. Is that the conventional wisdom amongst most of you and your colleagues, that this guy is not actually running anything, that in fact this is a third term of his old boss?
That you took the words right out of my mouth. Ever since we began the Biden presidency, we saw the same players, the Susan Rices of the world, come back to run domestic policy for Joe Biden. And so there's been this socialist cabal in the West Wing working, and it is essentially the continuation of the Obama presidency, the third term of Obama, if you will. There's no love lost there between Obama and Biden. That much is known pretty well in Washington. And I think that you're going to see a continuation of those socialist liberal policies as the Biden administration goes into 2024 to drum up the base, to get out the support they need to win. But they're going to pull out all the stops to make sure that Joe Biden gets reelected, and that includes trying to make sure that any opponent is taken down to size as a result of whatever tools are at their disposal.
If you're a betting man, Congressman Cline, how likely is it you will see a full tilt impeachment effort of Joe Biden before this session is up?
Oh, I think it's very possible. I think that the more information that comes to light, the pseudonym is just the latest in the effort to nail down the fact of how the money got to Joe Biden and how much money it was. So the bank records will follow, and we'll proceed from there. You know, the Judiciary Committee follows the facts wherever they lead.
Yeah, what is the most troubling part of this for you? Is it Hunter Biden himself, or the fact that the president himself may well have, the current sitting president may well have benefited financially, and members of his family, by the way? Because, I mean, unto himself, Hunter Biden is a problematic character. We know a lot about him, but not so much Dad. They've been very careful to keep that. They've supposedly separated church and state there. But you think this evidence closes the door on any idea that there were separate interests, that they were very much locked arm in arm financially?
Well, and I've never talked about Hunter Biden as his own case or scandal. I've talked about the Biden family scandals. I mean, that's what this is. This is an instance of the entire family working together to enrich themselves and potentially the president in the process.
Yeah. Listen, Congressman, I know your time is tight, so I'm always grateful for it. It was nice to meet your acquaintance, Virginia's 6th Congressional District. Ben Cline, House Judiciary Committee as well. We will watch with great interest what you guys find, and I appreciate your time today. Chris,
good to be with you.
Our telephone number, if you care to react to that conversation or have anything to share, is 888-630-9625, 888-630 WMAL. I'm Chris Stigall, in for Vince Coglianese today. Vince is out today and tomorrow. He'll be back on Monday. Follow along at Chris Stigall on X, formerly Twitter. If you're just tuning in this afternoon and you missed earlier today, I shared with you off the top of the show. My name's Chris Stigall, by the way, in for Vince Coglianese. Glad to have you here. Our number remains the same if you want to weigh in, 888-630-9625. And I guess depending on how you feel about this news, you may... Some of you that I've shared with on social media this, and some of you have said, nothing's going to happen. Others of you are kind of popping the popcorn and settling in. I think it's an interesting development. We'll see what the Georgia legislature is made of. Georgia State Senator Colton Moore, an open letter to the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, and the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger. And it reads, Dear Governor Kemp, we, the undersigned, being duly elected members of the Georgia House of Representatives and Georgia Senate, and comprising 3/5 of each respective house, and pursuant to their constitution, hereby certify to you in writing, with a copy of the Secretary of State, that in our opinion an emergency exists in the affairs of the state requiring a special session to be convened under that section for all purposes to include, without limitation, the review and response to the actions of Fani Willis. Ooh. Now, for those of you who don't know, Fani Willis, of course, the Fulton County DA that just brought another indictment against Donald Trump and 18 others. So I guess many, if not most, of the Georgia legislature is calling for an emergency session, and they want to deal with Fani. They want to give Fani a spank, I guess, is the way we're to read that. Now, what does that mean in terms of, I'm not entirely sure how that works constitutionally in Georgia now that they've requested it. I don't know if the governor is duty-bound to call a special session. I don't know if he can rebuff them. I don't know. I think a lot of you are probably not betting on Brian Kemp adhering to their request and calling an emergency session to deal with this, given his role in the certification of the 2020 election. But we wait and we see. It's an interesting move by the Georgia legislature anyway, and I commend those Republicans. It's pretty big and creative, which we need big thinkers and creative thinkers right now because we're dealing with really deceptive, devious, abusive people using the full weight of the federal government against, as of now, the leading candidate in the Republican Party to take on the current sitting president. And that's a problem. Somebody's going to have to start thinking creatively in opposition to this madness. Phil is in Fredericksburg. Phil, I'm glad you called. Chris Stigall in for Vince today. Hi.
Hey, I'm glad to call. Look, the thing that gets me is these Democrats are telling us everything that Joe Biden's doing because as soon as he does it, they charge Donald Trump with it. I mean, we can go through a laundry list of things that they've charged Donald Trump with, and Joe Biden's guilty of all of them. So what we need to do is, since they're telling us exactly how to charge Joe Biden, is to pursue what they're telling us. I mean, it's just incredible how precise the footprint of Joe Biden's crimes are when they charge Donald Trump with things he hasn't done, and yet Joe Biden is guilty of all of them.
I gather then that you would be fully in support of impeachment moving forward in the House, yes?
Right now.
All right. That's Phil. Don't wait another minute. Right now. Can you believe there are Republicans that are actually dancing on the head of a pin trying to figure out whether they think that would be politically smart to do? Which I cannot fathom. 888-630-9625. Love to hear from you. Chris Stigall and for Vince Coglianese today. This is WMAL. Timely book just out and can't wait to dive into it. The End of Woman. How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. The author, Dr. Carrie Gress, joins us to talk about it. It seems that being a woman these days, it kind of depends on who you ask. Sometimes it seems some people, particularly on the left, suggest men can be women, and some of the best women are men now, which is a strange notion, given that just a few years ago, I like to point out, Dr. Gress, I welcome you in, that I remember it was not terribly long ago, people were wearing the pink hats and screaming about the patriarchy. Now I'm very confused to hear some of those same women saying men can be women. So good morning. I welcome you. Hope you can make sense of it.
Good morning. Well, I'm not sure I can make sense of it, but I can at least help us figure out how we got to this point. So, yeah, it's pretty irrational and nonsensical because it's usually about the same set of people who are confused about all of it.
I don't share, I don't think, much in common with people like J.K. Rowling, for instance, from what I read and understand about her politics. But one thing she's not backed off of, and I don't know, even people like Adele, who I don't know have been overtly political about it, but I'm interested in these women who have become wildly famous in popular culture. And the one thing they will not back off of that has gotten them savaged is saying, I'm proud of being a woman. Being a woman means something, and I'm not gonna back off of that. What an odd thing now to get to lose your reputation over.
Right. No, it's incredible what the cancel culture is doing, and how, for obviously as long as anybody can remember, the whole goal was to really promote and empower women. And, the fact that the ideology of feminism is actually really imploding over this, just the infighting that's happening between the celebrities that you mentioned, and then, of course, those on the left who really wanted men, as long as you've got the feelings of a woman, you must be a woman. So anyway, yeah, it's pretty amazing to just see how stark the dividing line is coming, at us. And it feels like this just kind of popped up, but in fact, actually the ideology has been around for about over 200 years now. And that's really what I looked into in the book was, at what point did we get so confused about this? But I think the best way that I can describe what's really happened is feminism has asked the question, how do we help women? But instead of saying, how do we help women as women, it's been saying, how do we help women become like men? And when you start looking at everything through that lens, then it makes a lot of sense, because we've so prioritized the masculine and put it on a pedestal while simultaneously trying to get rid of gender altogether. That was a big movement in the 70s, and it just hasn't let up, that erasing of gender. So that's really what we're seeing right now is the fallout of all of that, because we haven't said anything good about being a real woman. And at the same time, we keep telling men, you need to become like us, but we hate you the way that you are. And anyway, it's just incredible, this rift that's been created and the kind of confusion that we're all sort of trying to sort through.
Dr. Carrie Gress's book is called The End of Woman, How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. I have had the privilege through the years of attending some events before she passed, Phyllis Schlafly. And I was so honored here in this year to receive the Phyllis Schlafly Eagle Award for journalism. I'd spent time talking to her and hearing her speak in person toward the end of her life, and then I went back and familiarized myself with her during the Equal Rights Amendment fight. And for people that kind of in the modern political fight feel overwhelmed, I look back at that. You talk about standing in the breach. Phyllis Schlafly took it on the chin with dignity and good humor at a time when you would have thought she was the most backwards, hateful, bigoted person, the way they would speak of her as a woman, right?
Yeah, and still do.
Yeah.
No, I never had a chance to meet her, see her speak, but I find myself now going back and trying to read more of her work, because I think she's such an amazing example of just the counterculture at work.
She saw this, to your point. She saw this.
Yeah. And she wasn't a celebrity. She was just a very concerned woman and mother, and she got other women to do that. And I think that's one of the incredible things that because the left has so dominated our understanding of womanhood, that not only have they defined their position, but they've also been able to define the position of what they think is Phyllis Schlafly's position, or people that disagree with them. And they make us look very, look like doormats, really, or, portray us in a terrible light. They sort of waltz out the women in the red robes and the red hats and all of that, the red bonnets. And so they've been able to control the narrative on both sides. And Phyllis just completely blows that up because she was so articulate and sophisticated and savvy. She really knew what she was doing. And so I think she offers us an incredible hope of, these groups that are booming right now, Moms for Liberty and Moms for America, and just finally getting those of us who have felt like we're so alone and don't know how to engage in the culture war. We're finally kind of have a platform to start having our voice be heard in ways that it hasn't been heard in, probably since the Eagle Forum in the 1970s.
Do you know how to define feminism today? How do you define it? Because, for instance, I watch a lot of women. My wife and I do a separate podcast about Christian education, homeschooling, and I've come to meet a lot of women who've taken to things like homesteading, homeschooling. The entire universe of their family and their home life is run by them, truly. And to say homemaker is to sound, I think, a little too overly simplistic. I mean, they really are diving in and almost hitting rewind and trying to go back to an era that was almost pioneer in nature, if you will. There's this real resurgence there. And I look at women like that and I go, wow, they're tough and that's impressiof. And do you define that as feminism? Is that that is, or something else?
No, I would say that's something else entirely. Part of the problem is that also feminism it's been this sort of like vague brand that people just sort of glom onto whatever they define it however they think they want to define it. But generally, a loose definition is this desire to help women. Now, of course, that's the big debate, is how do we actually help women? But what I found from my research was fascinating, because I found really three threads of it that started from the very beginning, the 1800s, when we think things were very pristine and Victorian, and they really weren't. And then we see through the communist era of influence that, eventually flipped into the new left and the woke culture. But those three elements that have been sustained are the occult, which is very much alive and well if you are paying any attention to current media today. But that was also very much a part of it from the very beginning. This idea of free love, of getting rid of monogamy and getting rid of any constraints on feminine or female sexuality. And then the third one is what we now call this smashing the patriarchy, which is this idea of collapsing male and female into, just very egalitarian terms, and getting rid of any kind of masculine authority or even, the gifts that men have. So those three things, I think, really define what the movement is and why it's an ideology and how it's been so pernicious. And we can really see this even in the new Barbie film. It's amazing. I went and watched it with my two daughters and was just blown away at how, the patriarchy piece was so evident. There's not a useful man in the whole movie, and things are in chaos when they're in control. But when the women are back in charge, everything's fine again. Has been really the goal. So in certain ways, it's a lot more complicated because it is much more of a developed ideology than people realize. But I think kind of figuring out what those pieces are makes it easier for those of us who don't want anything to do with those things, to sort of figure out, like, okay, what I'm doing is something different, and I'm really trying to honor womanhood, in a respectful way, instead of getting absorbed into this ideology, which has been so deadly, especially if you look at abortion numbers and whatnot. So, yeah, I think it's important that we start parsing this out and helping women figure out what do we really mean by the term.
Dr. Carrie Gress, again, the book is called The End of Woman. I was talking with a male friend of mine the other day, and we were kind of discussing the era of the, if you want to call it pinup girl or bombshell type actress. And there were eras, generations past, where they were prolific. There were many. I mean, kind of women and their sexuality were well known and marketed, put on posters and calendars, and not so much now. And I wonder, are we better off for that, or worse off for it, or was that normal or not normal? I was really kind of ruminating over that thought just this week, wondering to myself, it's almost like, I mean, unless you go on Instagram. Now, if you go on Instagram, you will see women who, of their own making, on their own, in their own control, will turn their Instagram account into look at me here, look at me looking fantastic in a swimsuit or whatever. But there's no kind of like, in fact, we've seen beer companies now actively say, like Miller Lite, sexualizing women or using bikini models to sell beer is, almost... I don't know. Again, back to The Handmaid's Tale or something. Was that a net negative culturally, do you think?
Actually, I think it's really interesting, because I think you also have to look at the rise of porn and just how much porn we have saturating the culture at this point. So I think that in many respects sort of has made the pinup obsolete. You think about pinups, especially during the wars, or there's that great scene in Shawshank Redemption where Andy Dufresne has got pinup after pinup. You can tell which decade it is based on who's pinned up on his prison cell. I think that porn has become a kind of surrogate in ways that it's this is like destroying so much of the culture that we probably won't even be able to figure out exactly the kind of damage that it's done until there's a postmortem on the culture. And we're seeing it's interesting. Last week there was a report about 12th grade boys and how they are really rejecting a lot of feminism and becoming more conservative. And I think some of that is because they don't really have to engage with girls anymore. Pornography is so prolific. They're not, girls are not, relationships are happening over technology in ways they didn't have, they used to happen in person. I think there are a lot of reasons for it. And I haven't really thought about the pinup itself, but I think that, it's certainly been supplanted by something much more, engaging on a video screen.
Yeah, well, listen, Dr. Gress, I appreciate your time today. Dr. Carrie Gress is the author of a book, an important book called The End of Woman: How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. Doctor, thank you so much for your time. Again, my name is Chris Stigall, filling in for Vince Coglianese today. You can reach me at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. I told you a little earlier in the show that I was going to share this story with you out of Philadelphia. That's where I do my morning show. And are you ready for this? This absolutely tickles me. And the only reason I'm sharing it with you, not because it's out of Philadelphia, but because it has national implications. I don't know if you're a Starbucks customer, neither here nor there, and I'm not really one of these purists that says just because I disagree with Starbucks politics, you shouldn't or can't drink a Starbucks drink. My wife loves the mocha frappuccinos, for instance. I genuinely don't care for Starbucks. It has nothing to do with their politics, but their politics helps me not care for them, that's for sure. One of the things that all of us understand, and I know that this is true in a lot of Washington area Starbucks, is that these are, how do you put it? There have been policies, longstanding policies in place for a while inside Starbucks that discourage bathroom use in their facilities unless you buy a product. They don't, maybe they let you come in and hang out, but they don't let you use the restroom unless you've purchased something. And you got to ask for a key to get in them. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. That was always the operating procedure for most Starbucks, certainly in busy urban settings, and we all understand why that is. Because of the drug problem, because of the homelessness problem, because of the criminal element, you'd get a lot of just bad stuff and, frankly, gross stuff happening in restrooms and businesses in major metropolitan cities. And so Starbucks issued this policy. It makes sense to me. If you're going to come in here, they didn't even care so much, at least at this particular Starbucks that I'm going to bring up to you in this story. If you haven't heard it, it's in Rittenhouse in Philadelphia, if you know where that is, Rittenhouse Square. One of the traditionally more moneyed places in Philadelphia. But they were always okay with you going in and sitting down, opening up your laptop or having a little meeting. You didn't necessarily have to have a drink or buy anything to be in the place. But if you wanted to use the restroom, still the same policy applied. You had to buy something to use the toilet. So one particular afternoon in 2018, a couple of guys are in the Starbucks there in Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia having a little meeting. And one of them wants to use the restroom, and the clerk said, you got to buy something. Now, the particular component of this story that's important, and the only reason I bring it up is because it is important to the story. It blew up as a national story, is because these two men meeting in the Starbucks were black. And because they were black, they raised a huge fuss about being racially profiled because they had to purchase something before one of them used the restroom. Screamed and yelled and carried on about it, and the clerks in the Starbucks called their district manager, and ultimately the police were called, and the police took these two guys out of the Starbucks. This became a huge national story you may not have paid a lot of attention to, but it became a thing, such a thing that Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks, came into Philadelphia, and they had a big sit-down with the mayor and the police commissioner, and everybody had to have a meeting to understand this terrible injustice that had happened, that these black men were not allowed to use the restroom without buying something, which had been a long-standing Starbucks policy. But like idiots do, who are woke, and morons who bow and take a knee to the mob and the woke culture, they said, okay, here's what we'll do. This was the genius move by Starbucks. We'll fire everybody involved, first of all. We want to make sure everybody's fired involved with this story. One of the people who was not in the store, but who did lose her job, was a woman who'd worked for Starbucks for 13 years. She was the district manager. She managed several locations, as a matter of fact. She managed for, let me see. I had this. Anyway, it was several stores in the region, in Maryland, and I think maybe here in D.C. too, I think. Anyway, she'd worked there for a long time. White lady, right? They fire her. She gets here it is, South Jersey, Philadelphia, Delaware, and parts of Maryland. 13 years she oversaw retail operations for all of these locations. Starbucks made her the scapegoat and fired her. Meanwhile, Starbucks implements a policy that says anyone can come in here and hang out anytime and use the restroom anytime they like. Well, I know it's happened here in Washington, D.C., and I know it's happened in major cities across the country. Because of that idiotic policy, Starbucks was overrun with homelessness, and people didn't want to work there anymore. People stopped going in these stores, and what you had was Starbucks closures all over the country because of it. And so the morons at Starbucks said, we probably shouldn't have done that, and they went back to the old policy that they changed in order to appease the woke mob a few years prior. So that unto itself is a hilarious story, but here's my favorite part, cutting to the chase. In June, a jury of this woman's peers, this woman who'd worked at Starbucks for 13 years, in Camden, New Jersey, no less, a jury awarded this woman $25.6 million in damages in June. The reason I'm telling you this story is not only was Starbucks hit with a $25.6 million ruling against them in damages to this white woman they fired, a federal judge this week just ordered Starbucks to pay her another $2.7 million in legal fees and other damages. Is that not delicious? This white woman, who'd been an employee for 13 years and doing nothing more than trying to uphold the policy that they set in place, they try to make a scapegoat of her. They ruin their stores in the process of trying to show how woke they are. And now they've been slapped this summer with $30 million in damages. It just couldn't happen to a nicer company. It makes me just about as happy as seeing Bud Light and Target floundering and Bed Bath & Beyond bombing after what they did to Mike Lindell. There is some justice still out there, folks. That's going to do it for me. It was a real pleasure to be with you. Chris Stigall in for Vince. Vince will be out again tomorrow, back on Monday. In the meantime, I'll see you at chrisstigall.com. Same handle on Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for spending some time with me. The great one is next on WMAL.